The laughter in the dining room died the exact second Brenda held up my mother's heirloom between two manicured fingers and called it $50 junk. 12 people were watching around the long mahogany table, their crystal glasses catching the glow of the imported chandelier overhead. My younger brother David sat at the head of the table, smiling complacently, while his wife carried on her performance. Brenda had spent the entire evening subtly boasting about her designer wardrobe, their winter trips to Europe, and the country club membership David had recently purchased for her birthday. When Brenda untied the modest silver ribbon on the cedar box I had brought, she did not look at the delicate woodwork. She did not bother to read the handwritten card tucked underneath the velvet lining. Instead, she pinched the antique gold filigree brooch by its pin, letting it dangle over her dessert plate like a piece of worthless scrap metal. "Oh, Evelyn," Brenda scoffed, her patronizing tone carrying across the room. "How sweet of you. You always were so sentimental about keeping old family clutter around. I suppose this will look fine on an old winter coat, or maybe I'll just drop it in the donation bin at the parish rummage sale next weekend. We really don't have room in the display cases for knickknacks anymore." Several dinner guests chuckled politely. A few exchanged amused glances across the table. They looked at me sitting quietly in my tailored, unbranded navy wool dress. They saw a 71-year-old retired nurse who lived on a rural homestead, drove an older sedan, and refused to wear designer labels. Brenda had spent 15 years convincing their social circle that I was an impoverished older sister who needed their pity. What Brenda did not know was that resting inside the leather handbag at my feet was a certified probate appraisal for $145,000. And by the time I finished reading the third paragraph of that legal document, every trace of smug amusement in that room was going to be wiped away forever. To understand how my brother's wife arrived at the point of openly insulting our heritage in front of 12 strangers, you have to know where David and I came from. Our parents, Henry and Margaret, were dairy farmers in northern Pennsylvania. They managed a 300-acre spread through brutal winters and summer droughts. My father woke at 4 every morning to milk 80 head of cattle, his hands scarred by grease and barbed wire. My mother tended a massive garden, kept the household on a strict budget, and worked part-time at the local grain elevator. They never took luxury vacations, and they drove their trucks until the engines gave out. Every dollar of surplus was channeled into paying off the land and ensuring that David and I finished college without a single dollar of student debt. When our parents passed away 15 years ago, they left a clean, unambiguous estate. I chose to take the homestead, the original farmhouse, the timber barn, and 80 acres of woods. I paid off the small remaining balance, maintained the land, and lived a peaceful, debt-free life on my nursing pension. David took his entire half in liquid cash and timber shares, nearly $600,000. He moved straight to the wealthy suburbs of Philadelphia, founded a commercial real estate development firm, and plunged into speculative ventures. Within 2 years, he met and married Brenda. Brenda was a woman who measured human existence entirely by surface optics. To her, a person's worth was defined by postal codes, luxury cars, and brand labels. She viewed our family's rural history as an embarrassment that needed to be paved over with polished marble. Whenever David brought Brenda to the farm for holidays, she walked into the farmhouse as if stepping onto contaminated soil, mocking my mother's cherry cabinets and handmade patchwork quilts as flea market junk. I never lost my temper. I knew who I was, and I slept peacefully knowing every inch of my land was paid for in full. What Brenda and David did not realize was that their flashy lifestyle was built on shifting sand. David's commercial real estate company had overextended itself during the recent property crisis. He had secured massive floating rate loans to build 2 strip malls that were currently 60% vacant. When interest rates jumped, his debt payments skyrocketed. Rather than downsizing, Brenda refused to give up the illusion of wealth. She insisted on maintaining their luxury leases and expensive parties by rolling balances onto revolving business credit lines. 2 weeks before this anniversary dinner, our family's lifelong attorney, Harold Sterling, called me at the farm. "Evelyn," Harold said, his voice grave. "David's bank reached out to my office on Friday. They were inquiring about the title status of your 80-acre homestead. David listed the farm as secondary collateral on a loan application, assuming you would co-sign if his back was against the wall. I told them immediately that you hold sole, unencumbered title." David was on the verge of financial ruin, and rather than asking for help with honesty, he was quietly plotting to leverage my home to keep his country club lifestyle afloat. That evening, I went up to the attic of the farmhouse. In my mother's cedar chest, stored inside a fireproof steel box, rested the Victorian salon sapphire brooch. The piece had been crafted in 1885 by a master jeweler in Vienna. My maternal grandmother had sewn it into the lining of her coat when she fled Europe during the Second World War. When our family arrived in America with nothing, that brooch was the emergency reserve that gave my parents the confidence to buy the dairy farm. Before my mother passed away, she placed the velvet case into my hands and said, "Evelyn, David has ambition, but he lacks patience. You have steady hands. If our family ever faces genuine ruin, this stone will buy security. But never give it to someone who does not understand the sacrifice it took to preserve it." Knowing David's loans were coming due, I had decided to extend a lifeline. 3 days before the dinner, I drove to Vance and Sterling appraisers in the city to verify the stone, certify the gold purity, and document its full provenance for insurance records. The master appraiser spent 20 minutes inspecting the untreated royal blue stone before stamping the official state probate seal onto the valuation binder. My intention when I walked into their home that evening was pure. I had planned to wait until the guests left, sit down privately with David, hand him the brooch and the appraisal, and tell him, "Take this to the auction house. Use the proceeds to clear your debts and start over with clean hands." I wanted to save my brother. Instead, Brenda turned our gift exchange into a public mockery. "Let's open Evelyn's gift right now," Brenda announced as dessert was served, waving her champagne flute. "Let's see what she brought for our big 30-year milestone." The 12 guests turned to watch. Brenda tore through the ribbon, lifted the gold brooch by its clasp, and delivered the insult that ended 40 years of patience. "I suppose this will look fine on an old winter coat, or maybe I'll just drop it in the donation bin at the parish rummage sale next weekend." The dining room went completely quiet. David sat at the head of the table, smiling sheepishly. He recognized the cedar box. He knew it came from our mother's chest, yet he chose to sit in comfortable cowardice rather than defend his family's legacy. I sat in my chair for 5 seconds, looking at Brenda's smirk, looking at David's weak expression, and looking at the guests snickering behind their napkins. In that quiet moment, every intention of rescuing David dissolved into cold clarity. I took a slow sip of water, set the glass down, and reached into my handbag for the blue leather appraisal binder. "Brenda," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the room. The whispering stopped. Brenda looked over, still smirking. "Yes, Evelyn. Are you going to tell us which flea market you found it in?" "You just informed your guests that you intend to donate that piece to a church rummage sale," I said, placing the heavy leather binder squarely on the linen tablecloth. "Before you do that, I believe the people seated at this table deserve to hear the official legal documentation attached to it." David's smile vanished. "Evelyn, please, don't make a scene. Brenda was just joking." "Disrespect is never a joke, David," I replied, looking directly at my brother. "It is a deliberate choice." I opened the blue binder and read the certified appraisal aloud in a calm, clear voice. Official gemological valuation. Item: Victorian natural salon sapphire and 22-carat gold filigree brooch, circa 1885. Central stone: unheated, untreated royal blue sapphire weighing 8.42 carats, surrounded by 32 antique European-cut diamonds. Historical provenance verified. Insured fair market replacement valuation, $145,000. The words hit the room like a physical blow. A neighbor across from Brenda froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Another guest dropped her dessert fork onto her plate with a sharp clatter. Brenda's arm froze mid-air. Her smirk vanished so fast it looked as if she had been struck, and the color drained completely from her face. 145,000? Brenda stammered, her hands trembling. "Evelyn, you're joking. This old thing?" "The certified registry numbers and the state probate stamp are right here on page 3, Brenda," I replied smoothly. David stood up so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His eyes were wide with panic. "Evelyn," David whispered, his voice cracking. "Mother gave that to you? That was the emergency reserve?" "Yes, David," I answered. "Mother gave it to me because she trusted me to know when our family truly needed it." David stepped toward me, hands outstretched, completely forgetting his wealthy guests. "Evelyn, the bank is calling our balloon notes at the end of the month. If we place that brooch in the vault as collateral, we can stop the foreclosure. Why didn't you hand this to me in private before dinner?" "Because I wanted to see who you had become when no one was looking, David," I said, standing up slowly from my chair. I walked calmly around the long table. Brenda stood paralyzed, her arm half raised. I reached out and gently took the brooch from Brenda's limp, shaking fingers. I walked back, placed the brooch safely inside the cedar box, closed the lid, and tied the silver ribbon with steady, deliberate knots. "Evelyn, wait," Brenda cried out, stepping forward in tears. "Please, I didn't know. I was just overwhelmed hosting tonight. It's a breathtaking heirloom. Please let me put it in our safe upstairs." I looked at Brenda with calm, steady pity. A woman who cannot recognize the value of family sacrifice when it is offered with love does not deserve to display it on her vanity, I said softly. "You called it junk. I am simply sparing you the burden of having it clutter your home." "Evelyn, please," David begged, grabbing my arm in desperation. "If the bank forecloses, we lose this house. We lose everything." I gently pulled my arm away and looked my brother dead in the eye. "You lost this house the day you let greed replace your character, David," I said firmly. "You tried to mortgage my homestead behind my back. You sat here and grinned while your wife spit on our mother's memory. You wanted to live like an emperor on borrowed money. Now you can pay the bill like a man. I tucked the cedar box and the appraisal folder into my handbag and zipped it shut. As I walked across the marble foyer toward the front door, not a single guest spoke a word. The shallow posturing and 15 years of arrogance had been reduced to ash in 4 minutes. I opened the front door, stepped out into the crisp evening breeze, and drove back to my homestead. The next morning, I sat in Harold Sterling's law office. I signed the formal amendments to my estate trust without hesitation. The Victorian sapphire brooch, the 80-acre homestead, and all of my savings were permanently placed into an educational foundation to provide full college scholarships for rural nursing and farming students in our county. David and Brenda were permanently and irrevocably excluded from the estate. 6 months later, the bank foreclosed on David's commercial strip malls. Unable to pay the deficiency judgments, David was forced to file for personal bankruptcy. Their suburban house was sold at a sheriff's auction, their luxury cars were repossessed, and Brenda's club membership was canceled. They were forced to downsize into a modest rental apartment on the outskirts of town, both taking entry-level jobs to pay off their remaining creditors. David wrote me a letter months later. He didn't ask for money. He wrote about the simple summers on the farm with our parents, admitting he had spent 20 years chasing things that could be taken away in an afternoon. I wrote him back a short, kind note, offering forgiveness as a sister, but keeping my boundaries firm. True forgiveness does not require you to hand your peace back to people who proved they would burn it for fuel. Every evening now, I sit on the front porch of the homestead as the sun dips below the tree line, watching the shadows stretch across the land my parents worked so hard to protect. Never let anyone make you feel small simply because you live quietly. Never allow anyone to treat your lifelong sacrifices as an entitlement. And never hesitate to close the door on those who mistake your patience for weakness. True strength never needs to shout. It stands quietly on solid ground, holds its head high, and lets time reveal the truth. If this story reminded you of the value of holding your ground and protecting your peace, please subscribe to The Quiet Files. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and always walk forward with quiet strength. Until next time, keep your head high and protect the peace you worked a lifetime to build.